When did I know I was gay? I think I always knew. Whenever I was myself in a totally relaxed and natural state, I was instinctively gay. I will always remember how, months after I came out, my aunt had made the comment to me of how effeminate I used to act when I was very young, and how she always had a feeling I was gay. When I heard that, I began to remember and realize how right she was. Years of suppressed memory and reasoning had awoken again in my head, and I remembered who I was as a child. I remembered how much I aspired to be feminine, how I decisively altered my character to be as female as possible. I changed the way I walked, I moved my hands differently, more slowly and delicately, and tried to attain a grace and elegance I saw that was so prominent with the female sex. Women were delicate, thin nymphs of beauty to me, and I so wanted to be that beautiful. I suppose these memories became caged up and censored in my mind when I went into denial about my sexuality. Everything that could possibly identify me as feminine or gay, which for a long time were one and the same to me, I withdrew from or changed. Like most people in a severe state of denial about their homosexuality, I became severely homophobic. How could I afford to have any homosexual influence? My family, prior to coming out, had been unpleasantly vocal about their opinions of homosexuals. What need did my parents have to conceal their feelings about family? To be sure, it was impossible for one of their children to be gay, or so I'm sure they thought for the longest time until I shattered their bubble. The more I heard their comments, the more scared and ashamed I became. There is one memory that I will never forget, and probably never forgive, no matter how understanding I could become. I think it happened between the times that I was 12 and 14 years old. The news had been talking about some strange conflict between homosexual rights representatives and the government, and the subject of gay marriage, or some sort of other hot topic like that. There were several gay couples who spoke out on the news, proclaiming their outrage at the government. I remember all too well the vicious jabs my brother and father had at them, all centered around the unnaturalness of homosexuality, and the uselessness of its world in this world for homosexuals. One comment seared itself forever in my mind. We should leave them all in a deserted island so they can fuck themselves and die. Sometimes I wonder if it's possible my memory has contorted this comment to be a lot worse than it was. Then, when I go and visit my parents at home occasionally, my father gets into some argument with whomever, and I realize all too clearly he was and is all too capable of making exactly that comment, if not worse. But even when he doesn't say anything, I can feel the true, raw, and horrible emotions and energy that stirs in his heart. He loves me? Of course he does. Only an abomination doesn't love his or her child. It doesn't change the feeling I get when I'm around him, the realization I've lived with since I was very young. I can feel the dark thoughts that I live inside him that are more venomous than even his strong words could ever express or admit to. When it comes to his opinion, unless he is in a rage, I never believe a word that comes out of his mouth, because I know all too well his capability of hiding his true self. I can remember all too well the comments and conversations and arguments that happened in the house with me in his presence, when he'd let his true colors for his family, to see how he truly felt about somebody. The realization of what he truly felt about me and people like me made my father's presence increasingly harder to tolerate. I knew, no matter what he said or how he said it, I'd never be good enough for him. It took many years before I could sufficiently detach myself enough from him to be able to take his opinions and words and say, I don't care. I think that, in turn, made me more intolerable to him. The scariest moments for me, often during those conversations where my brother and father would verbally bash the homosexuals in question and homosexuals in general, was when I tried to defend them. I would try the waters lightly, saying something like, well, they can't be that bad, That statement followed by what I thought would at the same time be a constructive humanitarian response, but ended up coming out as an adolescent babble. So much for honorable intentions. One such occasion, my brother struck me with a deadly look, saying, "What's your problem? Are you one of them?" In the words of an overused poetic description, my blood ran cold. Thankfully, I responded fast enough to avoid any major suspicion, and whatever doubts remained were swept away from my family's mind by the idea that they couldn't possibly have a gay family member, not a family as normal or well-bred as theirs. When I think about this now, I laugh. For a family like mine, who prided themselves on the intelligence and common sense, and whom I believe secretly had a certain amount of smug confidence that they were better than any other family, that they missed the signs that their sons could be gay because of prudish and closed-minded notions, is pretty funny to me. So much for intelligence. The thing was, through the time of my conception to my enrollment into a Montreal private high school, I was woefully ignorant as to what a homosexual was. I don't remember how, but the only information I managed to gather about homosexuals was that they seemed to possess an uncanny amount of extremely effeminate characteristics, which is of course one of the bigger stereotypes that plague gay people today. I think that is what made me so defensive of them, as well as outlined to me how I might be part of this faction of apparently ill-favored people. I was not yet within a state of denial about myself, so I was still incredibly fascinated by femininity, and I aspired for it. I couldn't imagine for the life of me why anyone would not want to aspire for it unless they lacked all sense of beauty and virtues. So I already had a more official sense of kinship with this group of individuals. I would also learn that my parents' standpoint on homosexuality is what is called a conservative perspective of the world. Yet I still didn't know why homosexuals were bad. Having never been taught the ABCs of how to make babies, how people take pleasure in the actions of making babies, or in the conception of love, I was incredibly sexually immature, ignorant of things at age 14 that kids would have grown up with me had known since the age of 8 or something of the sort. The idea of loving someone else other than my family was never in my thoughts. I didn't even think it was possible. Oh yeah, like every other elementary school male at the playground, I knew the style was to have a girlfriend. It was like a game to me, and that impression stayed with me until I started school in Montreal. Since I didn't know what love was, it never occurred to me that I could actually experience love with another person until about grade 9. I never really believed in love, because I had never experienced anything that I could link to the word. It had an almost fairy tale-like quality to it, with a hint of business on it. One day, I thought, I would see some girl, and we would realize we were ideally suited to living with each other. In the process, we'd have kids, which seemed to be a duty, and everyone else does it anyways, so I didn't see any reason why I shouldn't either. I'm inclined to say that sex ed, far from making me more aware of my sexuality, desensitized me to the idea of sex. If anything could have made babies seem more like work, it was teaching it within a school classroom, where only boring and useless stuff was taught anyways. No one ever explained to us that sex was pleasurable. No one explained to us how much of the adult world would someday be part or revolved very much around this one action. Not because of its reproductive abilities, but because of its sensations. It made sex seem like work. It had to be done exactly like this, and things were made for that, etc. Then again, I was at a greater disadvantage than some of my classmates. Some, if not most, of my male comrades had discovered the serious and curious, as well as incredibly satisfactory, act of masturbation. They could see that there was the slightest possibility that sex looked a lot more fun than it was presented to us. I was not aware of anything remotely related to it until I was 13 years old. Sex talk wasn't a hot topic in my house. It was lucky it even got into the list of possible discussions.